Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kat with Hannon Hill. Thank you all so much for spending the next hour with us as we talk about the demographic enrollment cliff, which admittedly is a bit of an uncomfortable topic for some, although we know it's coming. The number of traditional college-age students will drop pretty significantly between the years 2025 and 2037. And that's exactly why we thought it would be helpful to host this webinar, so that we can examine exactly what is happening and, more importantly, point out what higher education can do to adjust to this new reality by uncovering opportunities. Obviously, navigating the cliff has to be a multi-pronged effort that involves many different business units. But for the purpose of this session, we'll focus primarily on marketing strategies and ways to reach, I want to say, untapped or undertapped audiences. We're very excited about our guest today, Dr. Carrie Phillips, who is the CMO at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. And she actually wrote her dissertation on that exact topic, so she can provide a lot of high caliber insights. Also excited about our other speaker, our very own Chris Rapozo, who spearheaded our white paper on marketing to non-traditional students as a way to mitigate the cliff. And this is, of course, a topic near and dear to his heart because he is a non-traditional student turned marketer. So note that this presentation will be recorded, and we'll share the recording with you in just a few days. I would also encourage you to type your questions in the Q&A chat box. We might run out of time. We have a lot of content to cover. So if we do run out of time, we will be sure to follow up with a video to make sure that you get your answers. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the speakers to briefly introduce themselves.
Right. Well, it's so good to meet you all. I am Carrie Phillips, and I am the Chief Communications and Marketing Officer at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. I have been in that role for about a year and a half. And so just a couple of quick things about me. I tell people that I'm part creative, part analyst. I love the creative side of the work of telling messaging that resonates, making beautiful pieces that visually draw people in. But I'm also a little bit of a data dork, and I love a good spreadsheet, love to get in the weeds on analytics. And I also say that I'm fully curious, always trying to figure out, what's coming and how we can be better partners with our campus colleagues. Love college football. I love my puppy, Eleanor Bell. And that's pretty much a little about me. Excited to be here.
Thank you, Carrie.
Awesome. Hey there, I'm Chris Rapozo. I'm the marketing specialist here at Hannon Hill, and I'm also in charge of putting together these webinars. So if you've been on previous webinars, thank you so much for that. Like Kat said, I am a non-traditional adult learner graduate from the University of Florida turned marketer, and I'm also a podcast host of the Education Marketing Leader podcast, and I'm also a dad, and I'm pointed this picture out here with my son at graduation day. He's part of the reason, part of my why I started going to university at a later age and better myself. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you both. Now, Carrie, to set the stage for today's webinar, why don't you give us an overview of the demographic enrollment cliff, how it came about, and most importantly, how it will impact higher ed institutions?
Absolutely. So the demographic cliff really started several years ago, and the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education was the first group to really start talking about what is the enrollment cliff. And so they were really struggling with, starting to realize that we had a problem. And what they realized is that we would have between 350 and 400,000 fewer college students coming of age to go to college between 2035 or 2025 and 2037. And so they started kind of raising their hand and warning that this might be a problem. And so they went back to kind of figure out, where did this start? And what they figured is the economy tanked in that 2007, 2008 time range. And people decided maybe that they would put off having kids for a little bit, or maybe they were just not going to have kids overall. And so you started to see this societal shift around having children. So if you fast forward 17 to 18 years, that brings us to kind of where we're coming up on. They were really the first group to call this the enrollment cliff. So when you see those pictures of that giant cliff, they were the first group to really use that name. And so when you look at it, we knew it was going to be an impact. And so I was really curious and wanted to take that impact one step further to kind of see what did that really look like when you got to it. And so my data analyst side coming out. And so on that next slide, when you talk about the enrollment cliff, I was curious, what does that look like? And this is that number, $4.2 billion impact. And so in our industry, if you look at the number of students that were expected to see the drop and the average cost of tuition, you multiply those things together, 4.2 billion. And so chances are you may have immediately gone into your LinkedIn profile and changed it to open to work. But the reality is this is going to be a serious implication. And this is based on the notion that tuition stays the same in that calculation. And we know that sometimes that changes a little bit. But this doesn't happen in isolation. And so the enrollment cliff is happening at the same time there's a demographic cliff. And so I want to unpack that a little bit as well. And that starts with white traditional age college students are going to decline by 350,000 students. Black traditional age college students are going to be declining by 50,000. Then we have the next group, Asian traditional age college students will increase by 50,000. And then finally, Hispanic traditional age college students are going to increase by 100,000 students. So we've got some pretty major shifts in terms of what the demographic population looks like. And so if we're going to look at this and kind of look at these groups, what you start to see is this has an impact outside of just these students are different students. And so where that impact really comes into play is the idea that we're going to have a lot fewer students that have that traditional higher education background and context. You know, a lot of those groups that are seeing increases are going to be groups that maybe culturally have been at places where they haven't felt like they were part of a community. They may have a culture that's very family focused that looks a little bit different. They may have families who don't speak the language. And so those things tell us that if we're going to recruit those students, we're going to have to make changes both at our institution and our community. And those things in a purely economic fashion mean that it's going to cost more to recruit those students, especially if we think about those demographic changes as well in terms of academic students. We know that many of those groups that are growing are going to be first generation students. And we know without additional supports, first generation students are 33% less likely to graduate. So in that sense alone, it's going to cost us more to recruit those students in terms of the things we may have to add. It's going to cost us more to retain them in terms of academic support. So I would argue that that $4.2 billion is actually going to be much more than that when you look at those additional costs that we're going to see. We can also look at the cliff by geography. And as you see in this slide, every area is going to see declines. However, that's a little bit misleading because within each of these areas, you may have some states where we see growth. And so that means that, you know, I talk with colleagues a lot who are like, oh, we're growing in our area. And so there's a little bit of this false sense of security that it's not going to impact folks. And I would argue that I think it will. I think the impact will be different because, say, if you're in the South and you're one of the states in the South that's going to be growing, I think you can expect other state institutions in the South to start going to your state to find additional students. I think we might see other geographic regions start recruiting in other areas as well. So I think it's really going to impact everyone. And so as we think about this, what does all of it mean? And I think that's really where the conversation can get a little bit scary. And so if you look at what small institutions are, those institutions that have that that endowment of about 100 million or less, we're seeing data that says as many of those at 14% may close. Those are the institutions like Cardinal Stritch. You're seeing a lot more acquisition as well and aligning with systems to help provide some additional resources and support. We've seen that in several states in the news here lately. We're also seeing that institutions are having to much more than they ever had before live within their budgets. So you're seeing major implications at schools like West Virginia where they're having to do that work. And the data says if schools don't do that, some of the early numbers said that as many as 50% of those institutions could go bankrupt. So that's a little bit of the start of what is the issue here. Probably have terrified you. And so hopefully the rest of the webinar kind of brings us back a little bit and talks about what are some of the things we can do to help make this a better situation.
Yes, and we'll jump into the opportunities here shortly. But before we do that, let me ask you a quick poll question to all of our attendees here. How concerned are you about the enrollment cliff? So if you could please submit your answers. Wow, so yeah, obviously you are concerned, otherwise you probably wouldn't be attending this webinar, but we can definitely see that 56% are concerned and 29% very concerned. So definitely something that was to be expected, and I'm glad that you all are taking this seriously, and the ones that are not concerned might be in a very specific institution that just has a lot more power behind them and a lot more endowment. All right, well, Carrie, what demographics do you think have traditionally been overlooked that may now become more vital to the survival of higher ed institutions as we enter this demographic enrollment cliff?
Great question. And that was one of the things that I really focused in on my research, is trying to understand that exact question. Where was the opportunity? And there were a couple of key places that emerged from that. Certainly non-traditional students, those adult learners, those students who are really focused in online education was a major space. Military students. And I think one that we're also starting to see a little bit is those folks who are starting to reskill or skill up. And so I think those are all audiences that make sense, you know, that's came up in my data, but I think it makes sense when you look at that there's a huge percentage of students who have some college but never finished that degree. And so when you look at that, these are options that we can bring those students back. And I think in that next slide, it shows a little bit of what that number is. And it is astounding. Yeah, 40.4 million adults have some college and no degree. And so I think that's a huge opportunity to pull some of those folks back in and try to get them re-engaged with the college process. I think where we have to be careful about that is it has to work for your institution. And so a quick example there, you know, if you've never had an online program at your institution, you've never offered a class online, to attract online learners in a very intentional way means you're going to have a lot of work to do. You've got to make sure that the experience of everything that student is going to see from the time that they're marketed to the time that they actually get in that class, that entire process has to be thought through. And that's something that our marketing teams can really help kind of facilitate, as being those change agents to make sure that experience aligns with what the student is looking for. You know, and that's one of those things that I don't think we always think about. We just think, oh, we need to go get that group of students, but it's only as successful if we think about the other pieces that go along with that. And so the next slide hits it a little bit, some of the benefits of why looking at these groups are so important. You know, the online adult military learners, they have such great alumni networks. They help, you know, bring those folks in. They provide those robust classroom experiences where students are learning from one another and sharing their lived experiences. You know, it helps provide these opportunities for corporate partnerships and corporate ties through possibly teachers, but then also through great collaborations, obviously the revenue. But the one that I really like is that thing that we have to do, and that's increased flexibility and increased innovation. You know, I think about some of the things that we've looked at as we try to think about online learners at UA Little Rock, and it's everything that we have to think about. It's, you know, making sure that there are support services online. Do we need to make sure that certain offices that have traditional hours that they need, you know, extended hours or weekend hours? How do we make sure that internships are built in correctly? You know, sometimes we think, oh, people need to have an internship. Well, if these are adult learners who are working full time, they may not be able to do an internship. So how do we build that into the curriculum to provide a meaningful, you know, applicable experience for those students? And then finally, you know, making sure, again, that change agent of marketing, making sure that faculty are understanding this piece and the important role that they play, because we've got to make sure that the work is meaningful and valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, let me ask you this, since you represent the target demographic here. I'm curious, what makes a non-traditional student tick? So why did you ultimately decide to attend college at a later age, and why didn't you enroll straight out of high school?
Yeah, that's a good question. So on a broader spectrum, for many non-traditional students, specifically the adult learner, it's clarity and purpose that drives them to enroll at a later age, because now they've been through life, they've been through some things, and now they have a clearer vision of what they want to achieve. But there's also the personal growth aspect there, where whether they're adult learners, first gen working professionals, as humans, we all feel the need to grow personally and professionally, and higher ed enables us to upskill and reskill, as Dr. Phillips just mentioned. And on a personal level, I was born and raised in Germany, so I'm an immigrant to the United States. I came here at the age of 22. The educational trajectory was completely different for me when I grew up. I was raised by a single mom. She worked all the time. So education wasn't a priority when I grew up. So I wasn't nurtured to go into the university route. So work is what mattered. So I barely graduated from high school, had to enroll at trade school, worked in the trades for 4 years as a concrete finisher, knowing that I didn't belong there. So at 22, I packed my bags and moved to the United States. But then I arrived here and I thought, oh my goodness, I don't speak the language. So I had to learn the language first, and work odd jobs and then work my way up the ladder until I hit a career ceiling. And then I knew I had to further educate myself in order to advance in my career. And I also wanted to start a family. So to become a better provider, I knew that if I upskill and reskill through higher ed, I have a better chance to do so. And then lastly, as an immigrant and a first generation students, you feel like you owe it to yourself and to the ones left behind that supported you. So I felt responsible to grow as a person and to live up to my full potential. And higher ed gave me that chance to do so.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that personal story. Well, let me ask another question here to our attendees. To what level are non-traditional students part of your marketing strategy? Let's see the results coming in here. Give it a couple more seconds here. All right, I'm going to end the poll, share the results. All right. Well, it looks like the majority says moderately included, but I definitely can see an uptick here to significantly 26%. Think about it significantly, and only 8% not at all. All right. Very good. Thank you all so much for participating in this. So Chris, despite your initial trepidation, you ultimately decided to enroll in college when you were 30 years old, as you mentioned. So I'm curious, what did Hillsborough Community College and the University of Florida offer you that made you feel comfortable to enroll despite your, obviously very busy schedule?
Sure. You talked about the busy schedule. So flexibility was obviously key for me. I worked at a law firm full time, pretty strenuous job, and HCC, Hillsborough Community College, offered evening classes as well as weekend classes that aligned with my schedule. But they also had open admission. So that means anybody with a high school degree or GED could enroll, and they had smaller class sizes, which was really important to me because I've been out of school for like 15 years or so before I enrolled in college. And that personal approach there at HCC helped me to get my grades up and get a 3.86 GPA with my AA, which opened so many doors for me. And then when I found out about UF Online, my wife and I discussed it. We already had our first child, and then having an online track was really important to me. And then affordability as well. I mean, you have a kid, you have all these costs, and I have a mortgage as well. So cost is always a consideration, especially when you self-finance like I did. So both HCC and UF Online offered very competitive tuition rates. And then there was the diversity in course offerings as well. There was a wide range of courses catered to my interests and goals. And the courses were often taught by adjunct professors who had a full-time job as either agency owners or were presidents of some societies. And lastly, with UF, the reputation played a role as well. I lived in Florida back then, and UF Online is part of the University of Florida, which carries a strong reputation. So I knew that my return on investment would be there because it is recognized in the state of Florida and outside the state of Florida. So that's were some of the reasons why I ultimately decided to enroll in those institutions.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, Carrie, you mentioned in your thesis that no matter how successful you are with your recruitment efforts during this enrollment cliff, you can't recruit yourself out of this cliff, right? So we also have to talk about retaining enrolled students. So are there any specific strategies that have been successful in retaining existing students and even maybe encouraging them to refer new students?
Yeah, great question. I think in marketing, our response has sometimes always been, well, if we didn't get these students or they didn't stay, we'll just go get more. That's kind of been the MO, and that isn't the way it works anymore. We've run out of the students that we can go do that with out of that traditional student body. And so I think it really goes back to experience. If we as institutions aren't serving our students well, somebody else will step up to that challenge and try to serve those students. And so I think we've got to look at those things on our campus in terms of processes that don't make sense. And that's really where marketing takes this idea of the change agent and removing those barriers and those hurdles. So, for example, I can give you a great quick story. At a prior institution, we mapped the process that a student went through from the time that they decided they wanted to apply and the time that they enrolled on campus. And we just wanted to understand what that process was. And what we quickly figured out is that was 17 offices across 5 divisions. And my head exploded because it's, well, no wonder our students are lost and confused. And those are students that we were trying to get. Sometimes we make those processes just as complicated for the students that we already have on campus. I think about drop slips, and if it's a paper process and you have to go get 4 different people to sign to drop a class, and then the student can't find the right person, and so then they don't get their class dropped. There are lots of things like that that we can figure out better ways to serve our students and make the experience better for them. I think to Chris's point, I think flexibility in terms of classes is also going to be really important. We're playing with something called high flex, which is a pretty cool concept because it lets a student, one day they can take the class virtually, the next day they can take the class in person. And so they can really kind of engage with what makes sense for where they are and what things pop up in their life that day. And I think trying to come up with creative ways that we can be flexible for students is going to really be important. And then as we talk about our marketing messages, I think retention has got to be part of that. We sometimes want to tell these really beautiful branded stories, and I think every story can have a brand tie-in. But I think it's also really important that we make sure that our content strategy hits at empathy, that we see student struggles, it hits at relevant content that we know students are needing, and that we're making sure that that stuff is practical information. And so it's finding that balance. You can still tell those stories in a branded way, but making sure that people know things like the drop date, making sure that people know how they can get additional scholarship support if they need it. Making sure we're telling all of those things every step of the way as well, so that we're helping support those students throughout the journey that they're on.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think being authentic and actually addressing some of the anxiety that students have, right? Especially with regard to maybe changing location or just not being sure of, what the future will look like. And then, Chris, I understand that the reason that, you were reluctant to pursue a degree you just mentioned was cost. So I'm curious to hear from you, what can higher ed institutions do to kind of like show their empathy and alleviate some of the concerns that you had?
Yeah, you clearly want to communicate the ROI, because students want to know when they invest their time and resources into their education, will they reap the reward? So emphasize the long-term benefits of obtaining a degree and showcase the ROI, but also clearly communicate the cost per credit hours or semester, or I'm sorry, communicate the cost per course, not per credit hours, because a lot of people, I didn't know how many credit hours were in one course or how much a semester would cost, right? So this creates friction if you have somebody there who has to look all this up and then have to do the calculations. And then we also want to be clear and transparent with the breakdowns of all costs, not just the tuition, but also the books and fees and other associated expenses. Like, for example, if somebody's in New York City and goes to school there, but they're probably not going to be afford to rent an apartment in the city, so they need to allocate the resources to get there with the Metro card. That costs quite a bit of money. And then also make sure scholarships are available and more discoverable. I recently read a Forbes article that there were about $100 million in scholarships money that went unclaimed. So that may have, I know I received emails internally from UF Online saying, hey, there's scholarships available, but I didn't see any for me specifically. That doesn't mean they didn't exist. And that's something where maybe web personalization could come into play, where you can tailor certain content to the interest and needs of particular students that you have in your institution.
Yeah, very good. And we'll actually talk about a little bit about personalization here in just a second here. So let's ask the audience one more poll here, or actually two more polls, but this one specifically talks about diverse audiences. So how focused is your institution on flexibility to attract these diverse audiences? All right. Well, the good news is that only 5% said that they're not focused at all. So we're definitely seeing an uptick here too. And 31% said highly focused. So good on you. Well, let's move on here. In terms of recommendations, Carrie, you being a CMO for higher education, what are some of the recommendations that you have to effectively market to those non-traditional students?
Yeah, so these are the recommendations that kind of came out of the study that I did. And so the first is that idea of, DEIB. And I really love the B and the idea of belonging and making sure that every student feels like they're welcome and part of the university conversation. The value of personalization, the importance of partnerships, and then finding ways to highlight those student success stories. And so on the next slide, it talks a little bit about DEIB and that idea that we really have to make sure all students see themselves. I think diversity, sometimes we get really focused on diversity as one thing, but I think it's so important when we're talking about recruiting student groups that students see themselves. That could be a student that is of the same race, like that's a certain part of the conversation, but I think it's, hometown. I think it is the kinds of struggles that students have faced, seeing other students who have families, who have children, who are working full time. But then also the student type, seeing other students who are transfer students, because I think people sometimes have this idea that they're going to walk into a classroom and be the only person that looks like them, the only person that's had their lived experience. And that's not the case at all. Especially as we're working to build a lot of these types of opportunities for students. That is, I think, becoming more and more the reality is that there are a lot of those students. And so the more we can feature those folks and let everybody see themselves and see people who are like them, I think it takes some of those fears out when students have to walk into that classroom for the first time. Another really important piece is the value of personalizing everything that you possibly can. And so in this picture that you see, we personalize something in a view book, and view books are really easy places to personalize, but there's so many other personalization spaces. And so in the next slide, I want to show you one that I'm particularly proud of. So at a prior university, we served a large number of first generation students. So we're trying to figure out how to personalize things, but how to also get folks to know about nomenclature and things that we talk about in higher ed. To Chris's point, he didn't know necessarily what a credit hour was. And so in that first slide that you saw, it had the picture of every single dean, and we put them in casual attire so that they were very casually dressed. And then it had the student's name that was going to get that. And then on the back of the postcard, it just said, "Hey, I'm a dean. A dean is this person in the college that is, my real job is to be here to support you." And so, it helped put students at ease, but also helped to educate them about what was a dean. This piece that you're seeing right here is something that we did with the financial aid office. It's another one that I think was really incredible. And so financial aid came to marketing and said, "Look, we need some help. We are, struggling with students who don't understand financial aid. It's a complicated, scary thing. It sounds very legal and it's terrifying." And so we created this piece. And so you can see the variable data difference. And so students get different data depending on the things that they had filled out. So if they filled out the FAFSA, they didn't get information about that. But if they hadn't filled out the FAFSA, we explained what that is and why it was important that they complete that. There's a tear off slide that you can't see on this, but there's a tear off card, and that card had information of what aid that student was available to get. And so to Chris's point, it helped that transparency and cost of what was the cost, what was the aid, what was the difference that student was going to be expected to pay for. And so what we notice is that it changed the conversation. Students went from going into financial aid and saying, "I can't afford this, I don't know what to do," to they come in with their little torn off card and say, I need help. How can I get this bottom number higher? Or I don't understand what this particular scholarship is. And so it helped our financial aid team provide better support to the students, which is one of the things that we said was a brand pillar is student support. And so by using this kind of piece and personalizing it, we were able to really tailor the conversation to what the students needed to help get them the best answers about their aid. Okay, and so this one is part of a video, and so I bet we can send out this video to y'all after the fact, but we're not going to show it today for time. But it is pretty powerful, and so like so many things, sometimes you can fake personalization a little bit, and so we knew that the pandemic, like so many other places, graduations were going to be canceled, and so we wanted to do something that felt personal to those students. So we put together a video where we made luminaries, and so the names that you see on those bags are the names of the students who were graduating that year. And we spelled out on the football field the university name and 2020. And so it was a way to honor those students. And we told that story of setting up the luminaries in a video. And so it felt very personable because throughout the video, you could see, different students' names popping up. And so it felt like it was a real scenario. And it felt like it was real, and those students felt like they were being seen. But it helped us tell that larger story.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And we'll be sure to include a link to that video in our follow-up email. So that's just wonderful. Well, Chris, I know that you feel passionate about personalization as well, specifically when it comes to personalization of the website. So why don't you give us a quick overview of, what's possible?
Yeah, sure. So as we just heard, personalization is vital to make prospective students feel important through print and some events as well. Like we just touched on the video, I want to send it out after the fact. And the same rings true when it comes to your website. Now, there are several ways to do that on our website and provide a more personalized website experience. And today I'm just going to give you a brief overview of how that works through Clive Hannon Hill's personalization tool that integrates with any CMS, not just Cascade, our flagship products. But here are two ways to do personalization. One is implicit personalization. That means the personalization tool, the computer detects it without the user's input. So either wherever you're signing in from or visiting from through geolocation, browser or device, or through the digital body language, which means that whatever page you were on before, it'll recommend content that resonates with that. It's kind of like Netflix or YouTube, when you click on a video and then after the video is over, it recommends other videos that you may like. It's sort of like this. And there's another way called explicit personalization. Now with explicit personalization, this is when the visitor voluntarily provides the data. It's either done through form fills, polls, or through drop-down options. So let's just go on a generic university website. Here we got Cascade University. It's a top-ranked university in the South. And you're here on the generic homepage. You got the generic copy, you got generic images, but you also have a form and you have a drop-down option. So let's just say the visitor comes, it's a prospective student interested in a nursing program, and they put in their information and then they hit submit. And then we go to the next page and hola. And here we are with a more relevant copy. We have welcome future Phoenix, giving them a sense of belonging. Already you refer to them as a future student, right? So they're like, hey, maybe this is for me. And you also provide relevant information on the bottom of the page, like tuition and fees, housing information, student life, what have you. Now, let's say this prospective student gets busy and leaves the site. As we all know, students don't convert on the first visit, right? It's going to take a lot of touch points. So they come back at a later date. Maybe it's because of an ad or an email campaign, and they land on the academics page. In this case, the nursing page, because they're interested in the nursing school. So they come to the page and they get a subtle but valuable and relevant message on the bottom of the page here. Says, hey, welcome back. It already, shows them, hey, we remember you, and everybody likes to be remembered. But the page also offers some relevant information about the nursing program, and it helps prospective students find what they need. Go back one more time real quick. So on the bottom here, it talks about, that they're ER nurses. They the nursing students, they spend relevant time at the AR. So it gives them some more information on how to find out more about this. And then let's say, again, they don't convert right away. They move on to other things, but then along the way, they move down the enrollment funnel and eventually they end up on the admissions page, and the personalization tool, aka Cascade University, remembers them. It gives them vision, it gives them value, it gives them guidance, and it gives them relevance, all on one page. Right here, for example, the value part is if you're in the state of Georgia, there may be some free tuition for you. If you're in the state of Georgia, again, there's an open house, and we all know if you get them on campus, they're most likely are going to convert. So that's just a brief idea on how smart content within Clive works. So if you want a deeper dive in the system, figure out how it works on the back end, just let us know after the webinar.
All right, thanks for that overview. Switching gears here a little bit, and this is a topic that Carrie, you alluded to, and Chris, you did as well. When it comes to just providing more value through partnerships with industries and businesses. Carrie, why don't you give us a little intro into what your thoughts are with regard to partnerships?
Absolutely. So one of the things that came out of this is this idea, and I think it's really important as we talk about higher ed perception being challenged, and that's being a little bit under question, that we have to be reminding people of the great work that we do in our communities. So many of our institutions are doing incredible work. And so I think it's really important that we highlight how we are engaged with the community. That's so important at UA Little Rock. It's one of the pillars of our strategic plan is community engagement. And so in the next slide, you see one example that I think we are super proud of. And this is one of our contractor labs. So we have a construction management program, and in Arkansas and in the nation, there's a pretty major construction manager shortage of those construction leaders. And so the industry came to us and said, we need help getting more students engaged in this. And so we did some of that work. And so as part of that, we are graduating great students who are doing great work in construction. That program on our campus has a 100% job placement rate. But then we went to the construction folks and said, to help us get you the best version possible of our student, we need your help. And so we have had various construction firms, companies, labs come forward and help dedicate labs and help refurbish labs. We have a great concrete lab, a great soils lab, a great contractor space. And so all of these labs have equipment that these construction partners have helped us acquire. And so what that means is our students are working as students on the exact equipment they're using when they go out in the field. They're building great relationships with these firms that they are going to be employed with down the road. And it really creates a symbiotic relationship, because then the firms are also getting to know and work with our students. And so we have had right now 15 of these labs totaling about $500,000 in reinvestment into that program and into those spaces. So we're really proud of that work. Another way that we're really proud of that community engagement piece that I think is very similar to a lot of other folks is through education. That photo that you're seeing of the teacher, we have a summer art program that helps teachers be skilled up on how that they can be the best art teachers. We know we talk about STEM and we talk about STEAM. And so we know that that art piece is really part of that conversation. And so we're making sure that our high school art teachers are prepared to do the best version of the work that they can do. And then Arkansas, a couple of years ago, created some legislation that all students would graduate from high school with some level of computer science coursework. And so as part of that, we have helped the state come up with how do we create standardized curriculum as it relates to cybersecurity, as it relates to computer science. And so we're helping to kind of lead in that space to help the entire state. And then we're also doing a lot of summer camps utilizing that same curriculum to help keep students excited about that work, so that when they get to college, they're in a really good spot. Again, it goes back to that being an economic driver and helping make sure that we're providing a professional workforce that can meet the needs of the economy in our state. And so that's where that community engagement piece is so important. And I don't know that sometimes we as institutions do the best job of telling that story and kind of bringing people back to why that work matters. But I think the more that we can highlight those things, I think it helps us raise the perception of our institutions, but helps our community see that we're viable, valuable partners, and we are great suppliers of their workforce needs.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. A lot of colleges and universities have a lot to offer in that regard, but sometimes the story kind of gets lost when it comes to the digital presence. So it's really good to see that. Chris, let me get back to you here. As a non-traditional student and now marketer, you obviously provide a very unique perspective here. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. What are the top 3 things that higher ed marketers can do to appeal to non-traditional students, whether that's career changers like you or international students like you, or any other thing that makes you unique? What are some of the things that higher ed can do to appeal to those non-traditional demographics?
So we briefly touched on it earlier. The DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, is super important, especially for first generation minority students. But for me, belonging was so vital. I mean, I was so embarrassed to tell people I didn't have a college degree at 30 when everybody else around me did, especially working in a law firm. And then I felt embarrassed walking into a classroom at the age of 30, because in my mind, I thought I was the only middle-aged or 30-year-old walking into a college campus and everybody else is 18 years old, because it's kind of like what I thought college was. So showcasing diverse people that look like non-traditional student demographics will shed a light into what it's really like on campus and kind of battle that unconscious bias that some people may have. And then also another way to communicate it is in messaging is to showcase support systems and resources, I would say. So introduce career counselors on your website to show, hey, there's somebody there. You're trying to upskill, you're trying to reskill, somebody's going to be there, guiding you along the way, as well as mentorship programs. It's so vital to have somebody that kind of teaches you and moves you in the right way, you know, so you don't drift aimlessly throughout your college experience. And of course, you want to communicate the flexibility. That's so vital. I actually have this piece here. I got a letter in the mail before in my last semester at HCC, and it was a mailing piece, and it said the Gator Nation is everywhere. Okay, it's a traditional mail piece, not digital. It's still on my fridge to this day. It just tells you how powerful mail pieces are sometimes. But this mail piece made me aware that it was actually an opportunity for me to go to the University of Florida from Tampa, which is 2 hours away from Gainesville. And then you want to communicate cultural integration programs. It's especially vital for international students who need help to adjust and feel at home. And anybody who's ever had or felt homesickness, it's really hard to navigate. And then if you have the pressures of school, you know, that's a whole other story. And then lastly, you want to engage through authentic storytelling, and you want to highlight student success stories like you have here. There are some of the University of Florida that they wrote on me, and a lot of people ask themselves, do I have what it takes? Am I the only one who's going through this? I'm going to get a job after this, right? So you want to get these success stories like you see here on the Where Are They Now, where I talked about, hey, I just graduated, now I have a new career. Everything is possible if you really apply yourself, and this institution helped you get there. So but success stories aren't just for prospective students, they're also for the current students. They feel appreciated, they feel valued. And if you make somebody feel seen, appreciated, and valued, they'll tell your friends about you, and they'll remember you, and they'll remember you long after graduation, and they'll remember you through donations. So that's a little there.
Yeah, great insights here. And Chris, you know, if you had seen personalized images that showed an older demographic versus, you know, freshmen throwing frisbees on campus, you know, that part might have, you know, put your mind at ease as well.
Yeah.
So let's go back to personalization here with a one more quick poll here. What are the biggest obstacles to embracing personalization for you? I don't see the poll come up. Does anybody see?
Can you launch it? I can't launch it. Poll has been launched in this meeting. I didn't launch it. I don't see it.
All right. How about we follow up in our follow-up email? We have a lot of follow-up items here because we really would like to know what the biggest obstacles are to embracing personalization. So maybe we can help you navigate those obstacles. And speaking of obstacles and challenges, so we discussed the opportunities that non-traditional students bring. Oh, there it is. No,
There it is.
Oh, there it is. There's our poll. All right. So what is the biggest obstacle for you when it comes to embracing personalization? I saw budget constraints pop up pretty much immediately. Okay. All right. Wow, I would not have guessed that budget constraints was the number one. I would have thought maybe just resource constraints in terms of time, but lack of nobody or very few people think lack of skills or expertise. So that's very, very good. All right. So we have to work on those budget constraints. Luckily, there are a lot of tools available that allow you to do a lot with very little. So thank you all for participating. All right, so again, we talked about the opportunities that presents themselves through appealing to non-traditional students. We talked about the shift in marketing strategies, and we shared a lot of great marketing tactics. Hope you have a lot of takeaways from this, but let's face it, it might sound good in theory, but I'm sure there are some challenges. So Carrie, maybe you can speak to that. What are some of the challenges and considerations that higher ed marketers should be aware of when targeting this type of student demographic?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is priority. We've talked about a lot of things and we've added a lot today. We've talked about a lot of new strategies to take on, a lot of new tools to consider. We're doing a lot of addition. But my guess is we're not also adding budget, we're not also adding people. So that means we've somehow got to figure out where that bandwidth to do that work comes from. That may be, we have to have some tough conversations about what things we're doing for which audience. It may be that we've got to look at, new ways to grow bandwidth and capacity. And I think that's a tough conversation, to go to a group and say, hey, we need to really grow this thing over here. So that means we're going to do less for you. Like nobody wants to hear that, just to be really candid. And so I think that's going to be one of the challenges is navigating what thing needs to be the priority. And that's probably a bigger conversation. That's probably much more of an institutional conversation. But those are hard conversations to have.
Yeah.
I think from the academic context, it really turns on marketing to be that change agent, to help bring faculty and to bring staff and everyone in to make sure that courses are meeting the needs of all students. That we're finding ways that work isn't just busy work, that there's value, that we're finding ways to incorporate the value that our non-traditional students, those adult learners, those military students, that they bring to the conversation about their life skills. So I think that's going to be really important, but that's going to be a challenge. And then I don't know if you've heard, but higher ed is a little siloed sometimes. And so when we talk about those silos, that means that, some of the logistics of some of these things, getting the right people together in the right kinds of room to serve all of those students is going to be really hard. Going back to that idea of mapping a recruitment pipeline and going through 17 offices across 5 divisions, that's a lot of infrastructure and a lot of logistics to sort through and figure out how do we do this in a cohesive, clarifying way. And sometimes we all get a little territorial about things. And so trying to break down some of those silos and really, looking at the student and what the student needs are and prioritizing that. And those are all things that it takes collaboration, it takes trust, and it takes a lot of effort. But it's one of those things that I think marketing and communications professionals as change agents are really equipped to do that work.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. And yeah, you made a good point by saying that faculty needs to be prepared to deal with a more diverse student body. I think students need to be prepared to deal with a more diverse student body. How can marketing contribute to that?
Great thought. I think it comes back to this idea of diversity can mean a lot of different things. And I think it's really important that we frame that in a life skills application way to students that, part of what you learn is, and when you're exposed to students who maybe think differently than you, have different lived experiences than you, all of that has value. And so I think it teaches us important things like learning how to collaborate and work together, learning how to disagree without being disagreeable, learning how to, ask clarifying questions or ask curious questions. And those are all things that are going to benefit our students as they go into the workforce. As they're working with folks in their jobs, they're working with leaders in their communities, they're going to sometimes have to have tough conversations, or they're going to have to, work with somebody that has a different perspective on someone and find common ground and find those beautiful similarities within a lot of difference. And so I think framing people that this is a life skill too. If you see someone in a classroom that maybe looks different than you or is a different student type than you, that's a real opportunity to learn from somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to the silos here and ask you a quick follow-up questions here. So one of the challenges in higher education has been the lack of communication and collaboration between marketing and enrollment, right? So marketing typically owns the website, owns the CMS, and then enrollment owns the CRM. So you have a ton of data available to you, but it seems to be difficult a lot of times for marketing to truly understand the success and impact of their efforts. And so, they want to know that the strategies that they implemented actually result in enrollment numbers. What's the correlation? And I'm just curious, is this something that you've observed as well? And do you have any ideas on how to foster more collaboration and more data sharing? And maybe you have some success stories to share here.
Yeah, at a prior institution, when I stepped into the role as director of marketing and communications, we did not have a great relationship with our admissions team. We didn't really work well together. We didn't particularly see eye to eye on much of anything. And it took a real decision commitment that we were going to fix that. And the marketing team started having 2 to 3 people, and the admissions team had 2 to 3 people, and we would meet every single week. And those meetings at first were very uncomfortable. There was not any real trust in the room. And so it took, we started creating a single agenda that one person would send out every time. Everybody had until X time to put their things in the agenda. Anything was on the table. We would also send out a meeting recap of notes afterwards so that there was a single source of truth as to what all was discussed. Because again, if you don't have trust and you don't have shared experience, you could say the same thing and people hear it 2 different ways. And so we stuck with that time and time again. We really developed a defined process of how we move projects through a system, but really tried to use process and very intentional process to start building that relationship. And it took about a year to almost a year and a half of meeting every single week in those conversations to the tides start to turn. And by the time I left that institution, admissions would hear something and would give me a call and say, hey, this is going to be bubbling. Wanted you to have some heads up. You got mentioned in this other room and we didn't want you surprised. Or we would hear something and, understand it from their perspective, and took a really not great relationship and turned it into collaborative allies that were on the same page and supporting each other. And our marketing got better, our advertising got better. And the work we were giving to admissions in terms of helping them understand what they could be doing to tell our story as well also got better. And so we started to blur a lot of those lines about what was mine and what was theirs.
Gotcha. That's definitely an encouraging story to hear. And, I guess the moral of the story is it just takes time to build that trust, to build those relationships internally and externally. So
absolutely.
Well, I don't see any questions come in. A comment here that budget constraints are closely tied to insufficient personnel. So the obstacle to implementing more personalization appears to be not just budget constraints for tools, but more importantly, not having enough people to really not just come up with a strategy, but more importantly, to implement it and then measure it. So thank you for that comment, John. Well, we're almost up on time here. I know we could continue at least for another hour on this topic. It is so extensive. But thank you so much, Carrie, for your expertise.
Yeah.
I know for sure that our audience has a lot of very, very valuable takeaways. And of course, we will share that video with you because I think it's really powerful. Thank you, Chris, my colleague and teammate, for so many great and valuable insights and for sharing those very personal stories that make you a part of that demographic that higher education really should be targeting. And, just a shout out to all the employers out there. Look at the career changers. It'll pay off in spades.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So,
thank you again.
I hope that you'll stay tuned for our follow-ups. If you have any takeaways or any feedback that you would like to share with us, please feel free to shoot us an email at marketing@hannonhill.com. We're always interested to hear what you think of our content and if there are any topics that you would like for us to cover in the future. So once again, Carrie, Chris, thank you so much. Thank you all for your time, and we will follow up. Have a great afternoon. Take care.
Hi there. Welcome to Hannon Hill, home of Cascade CMS. I'm Sam.
And I'm Rebecca. Please join us for a few seconds as we introduce you to Cascade CMS. We've been providing content management solutions to hundreds of universities for over 20 years. That's a lot of experience, and we continue to incorporate what we've learned into our products.
We're deeply invested in our customers' success. Our team meets with every customer multiple times a year to ensure they get the most out of our products, get their feedback, and to learn how we can best support their goals. We're equally serious about technical support. Our average response time is about 20 minutes. Imagine that. And there's no extra charge for that premium care.
We know what keeps you up at night when it comes to your website. You're worried about security, you're concerned about accessibility. You want to make sure that all content is properly vetted before getting published to maintain brand consistency. Cascade CMS provides peace of mind in all of those areas and more. And using our personalization tools, you can ensure that each individual visitor sees the content they need to see when they need to see it. If you want to improve the effectiveness of your content, give Cascade a look.
These are just a few of the benefits that you'll enjoy as part of the Hannon Hill community.
Maybe you're outgrowing your current CMS, or perhaps you've identified higher goals that you can't quite reach with the status quo.
No matter where you are in your journey, we're here to be your trusted guide and advisor. For more information, fill out our contact form.
And when you're ready to take a personalized tour of Cascade CMS, simply request a demo. Thank you so much for taking the time to visit us today. Have a great day.